G'day and welcome to another Jadus installation video. In this clip we're going to be installing the triangle tidy kit, which is going to remove all these components here in the middle of the frame and tidy everything up. We're going to relocate the battery, tidy up some wiring, and it's going to leave us with a really clean looking bike. So we'll get stuck into that now. Before we go any further, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the kit contents, and then I'm going to remove the seat and the side covers, and then we can look at how we remove the rest of the parts. So here's the contents of the kit, and it'll become clear throughout the video exactly where you should use these components. But just to summarize briefly here, on the left is the electrical parts with some connectors and some wire. In the middle is the battery tray with the bolts that attach it to the frame, and on the right is the electrics tray, also bolts that attach it to the frame, and in the middle 2 bolts that hold the regulator rectifier in place if you wish to relocate that. Okay, so I've removed the seat and the side covers. Now we can see how the stock battery tray and airbox is held in place. We're going to start by removing the battery terminals and taking the battery out, and then to remove the battery tray we remove this bolt here, which has got a nut on the back side of it, and it's also held in place by a plastic stud that pokes into a rubber grommet that's sitting in the regulator rectifier bracket here on the frame. And then we'll remove the airbox, which has these 2 bolts up here that we'll loosen and remove entirely, and this also has a plastic boss that pokes into a rubber grommet in the frame here. So let's start by removing the battery terminals and the battery, and then the battery tray and the airbox. We can just leave all the wiring dangling for the time being. So I've managed to remove those components, and I failed to mention it can be a bit tricky to get them out. You sort of have to pry them out of the frame a little bit, and also that this starter relay here is attached to the battery tray. So just pull that off. It's held on with a plastic tongue through this rubber bracket here, and we're going to reuse that, and that'll attach to the Jadus tray. And another thing I failed to mention was that the airbox, of course, is attached to the carburettor. So loosen the band that holds that on before you pull it off. Alright, let's move on to the next phase. Next up is to start preparing for our wiring. And if you have a stock SR, you'll probably have one of these crappy fuse setups here. I recommend replacing this. You don't have to, but I do, for one of these more standard automotive style setups. And these are better and are easier to get hold of components and fuses for those. And when you install it, you'll want to install it with a quick connector like I have done here, so that you can take it in and out of position. We're going to install one of those anyway with our wiring harness. In the meantime, disconnect the starter relay so that that is a separate component like that, and it should look like this. And if you have a loose red cable out here, which was to run over all of our lights and things, accessories, cut that and leave it loose, and we're going to put one of these on. So I'll show you how to do that now. So for clarity's sake, I'm going to do this real time, and I'm hoping that your setup and your stock setup will be somewhat similar to this so that it's clear, because I expect you should be able to follow these steps. So you'll have your fuse for your accessories into the starter relay. What we're going to do is we're going to clip that, because we're going to, whatever setup you have here, we're going to be replacing it with our own ones. So I'll remove those. And then your relay should still have the starter motor wire attached to it. We're going to sort that out in a little while. We'll disconnect this here, and then on this wire here we're going to use our wire strippers. That's the right size. Wire strippers are a great investment if you're going to be working on custom bikes. You can get by for a while with knife or pliers or whatever, but they help a lot. Okay, now remember, always put a female connector on anything that's going to be live. So in this case, this end is going to be live once we attach that back to the battery. So I'll put our female connector on here. And here's another great tool to have, is the special crimp. If you don't have one of these, it's even indicated with which size connector you're using. You can use pliers on these as well if you don't want to fork out for an expensive tool. But I've got one because I do a fair amount of work on bikes. It's the blue one, which is the middle. Set that in the right place. Clamp that on. Right, there's our accessories sorted, and then on the other end, I should really get rid of that so I can get at it. Oh sweet, that's already stripped for me. Okay, now to get the male one, put that in place. That one's pretty stumpy. Crimp that fucker. Nice one. Perfect. Okay, and in between these we're going to be using an extension because this gets relocated underneath the swing arm. Right, we can leave that alone for the time being. We'll come back to that. Now, from your main wire harness, you need to locate this adapter here, and that sends the signal from your switch block up on the handlebars down to the starter relay that you want to start the engine. So we're going to nip those there. We want to leave, I don't know, a couple centimeters free here. Actually, maybe more, something like that. And then we're going to extend these here. So I'll show a separate clip showing how to do that and how we want to set that up. And on these here, perhaps I'll take a cut here, and clip out, and then show you these ends and what we want to do with them. Okay, so I managed to remove the tape from these two wires here. Blue and white stripe, red and white stripe. And we are going to put some cable adapters or cable connectors on these. First, we'll strip them, make sure we've got the right size. Again, all of this kit can be installed with cheapo, basic workshop tools, but it does help if you have good stuff. So, it really doesn't matter which connector you put on these, but I like to differentiate them so it makes it easier when you connect and disconnect. So take a male and a female so that you don't end up with two males or two females so that you can confuse them later. Yamaha does that themselves. And then, yeah, it doesn't matter, but I like to think male, blue, female, red. That's not very PC, is it? Fuck PC culture. Alright. I'm going to prepare that in the crimp first. Great. Poke that bastard in. And get the female on there. Okay. Right. That's our harness sorted for the time being. So just to recap what we've done, we've located the blue and white and the red and white wires, and we've put some connectors on them. We've taken our fuse and put our own connector onto that, and on the starter relay we've put the opposite connector for the accessories and the power to the lights and stuff on here. Now we're going to move on to creating our own small wire harness which connects these components. So I'll show that in a separate clip and then we'll come back to this. So we'll focus on one step at a time. Here's our wire from the kit, And here's our wire splicers. We've got 2 of those, and here's the connector that we clipped out of the stock wiring harness. And first we're going to take the tape off that and strip those wires, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so I've taken the tape off, stripped the wires and prepared those. Next step is to put on these connectors and attach those. They have a stop in the middle, which the end of the wire stops at, so that you know it's home, and it's the same for the other side. And then we clamp that down with the pliers. Try and do it on camera. Once that's in place, take the next one. Now these connectors are actually special connectors, so once you've clamped those in place, you can get your heat gun and apply some heat to those, and they should shrink and grab the wire, and they have a sticky substance on the inside that actually grabs the wire. Before we apply any heat to these, because they're going to shrink, we need to put the other 2 wires in, of course. We have 3 wires in the kit. The thicker one, the larger one, is for the power, for the accessories, because it's got a larger surface area or cross-sectional area, and it can carry a higher current and a higher load. So take that out and put that aside, and then we're left with these 2 here. Yeah, perfect. Clamp it with the smaller one. There she goes. Red to red. Here's the small one. That one worked first try? Yes. Okay. Here's our inline splicers. Worked a treat in the end. Now I'm going to apply some heat. Okay, now we're going to shrink these. And a heat gun may or may not be a tool that you have at home, but it certainly helps with wiring. If you don't have a heat gun, it'll probably work with a lighter. And like that, we have a really nice connection, and you can see how the inner part of these splicers, it's sticky, it's tacky, has grabbed onto the wire. Okay, so that's that step done. So now that we've got this end of our wire harness or extension kit connected and complete, we're going to put some wire connectors on the other ends, remembering that on the stock wire harness on the bike we put a male on the blue and a female on the red. So now of course we're going to be doing the opposite. Okay, so I've got my wire connectors on both ends now. This part of the harness is complete. Set that aside, and now we move on to the power supply cable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a connector, the remaining 2, one on each end. Okay, now both cables are complete for our wire harness extension kit, I guess you could say. And now we're going to tape these together, because both of them lead to the battery tray which sits under the swing arm and attached to the starter relay, and then we lead that wire up through the frame and connect things to the rest of the wire harness underneath the frame there on the electrics tray. But we're actually going to tape these together with some good quality electrical tape, not included in the kit obviously. The only point here that's really important is that when you tape them together, you make sure that you have the correct end with this connector. So remembering when we put some wire connectors onto the power supply cable from the starter relay, we used a female because we want a female connector on anything live in case we have any shorts. We don't want any naked contacts like a male one. So we have a female at the other end down by the starter relay. therefore we want a male to meet it down at this end. So when I tape all of these wires together with electrical tape, I'm going to have the male end sticking out here, and I'm probably going to start taping here and then tape them together from about this point here. I'll do this and then show you the example. Okay, and this is what the complete extension harness should look like. You can see when I've taped it up, I've left a little bit of the power cable out of the tape so that we have some flexibility when we install this. Okay, we'll set that aside and get back to the bike. Coming back to the bike, I'm going to start setting up for installing the battery tray. I'll set up the camera so you can see a shot underneath the swing arm here, but in the meantime you can remove the center stand. If I haven't mentioned that already, or if you haven't read it anywhere in the description of the kit, you can't install this without removing the center stand. The way I see it, it's big and heavy and bulky anyway, and I've never had it on any of my bikes, so get rid of that thing. So here's what the underside of your SR should look like with the center stand removed. Those two M8 bolts there we're going to remove, and that's where we're going to attach the new Jadus battery tray. It's worth mentioning at this point too that if you have a SR250 Special, the first release, it's going to look a little different, but the tray fits both models. This is the SR250 Classic, and the difference is mainly in the brake perch over to the right there. But before we put the bracket on, we're going to prepare the starter relay and attach that to the bracket first. So let's do that. A quick note on the battery tray before we actually install it. I'm going to list the batteries that this works with, that it's designed for. In this installation I'm actually going to use the anti-gravity 8 cell, and there's a couple of other batteries in this size that work, and then you'll notice on the bracket itself there's a couple of little notches on the sides, and that's to mark where the edge of a 4-cell battery would fit if you want to run a smaller battery still. And you can cut this bracket off here in between those two notches so that the smaller case battery fits perfectly there, and that's going to save you more weight, but it might run you the risk of running flat faster. But some people want to do that, and there's also a few batteries that work in that case too. But as mentioned, we're going to be using this one here, which is pre-loved from another project, but it works just fine. Another thing to note is included in the kit, which I did not show before, is this large cable tie, and that's what's going to hold the battery in place. So I'll show you that once it's in place. Okay, now I will admit that this next part is quite tricky, but to help ease installation, you can go in and loosen these wire attachments here. So back them off a little on both sides. I've already done, and what that's going to do is allow you to move these a little more freely. And another thing with the battery tray, this flange here is actually to reuse the stock rubber bracket, and that should poke up inside one of these slots here, and that's what's used to hold that in place like that. If this is broken on your bike or missing, you'll see that there's two slots here in the bracket, and you can use a standard cable tie to hold that in place instead, as long as the metal of the starter relay is isolated so that you don't get a short there. What I decided to do is do a bit of a dummy setup here and give you a bit of a preview for how the wiring should be routed on the bracket, obviously when the bracket's sitting underneath the swing arm. So we've spun these guys around so that the wire to the starter motor is pointing upwards, and then the wire to the battery for the positive side is pointing outwards, and we've got this sort of sharp bend back to the plus, and then we have our negative or our ground on the other side, and then we still have access to our two connectors back up into the cable harness. So It should look like this, but underneath the swing arm. It's going to be difficult, but yeah, have some patience because the results are really worthwhile. So I'll get to putting that in place now, and then I'll take a few shots of how it should look. Okay, so here's what that setup looks like now with the tray bracket fastened to the frame. So you can see the wires are sitting in the same position that I showed previously, and it's on that tab on the bracket, but now the bracket's in place and the two M8 bolts with lock washers bolted up tight, so don't forget those. Okay, and here's the battery and everything in place, all connected. It's difficult to get a decent shot of it, but you can see the positive and negative terminals, and you can see the cable ties that I've got on there holding the battery in place. Let's see if I can lower this a little, and you can see the two cable ties there that hold the battery in place. Right, we're done for this part of the installation. Now that we're done installing the battery tray, we're going to move on to the electrics tray. And it's a pretty straightforward affair. We're going to take one of the button head M6 bolts with the lock washer, and we're going to slide the tray into place, making sure these two fastening points come over the top of the frame brackets here, and on the other side it goes underneath, and this bracket here on the frame is already threaded. So we're going to take the bolt and screw up through here, and we're going to do it up finger tight, and then on the other sides, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that these holes here are so large to take up the different tolerances in the frames of the SR250s, because they can be quite off. So to get around that, I've done the holes quite large, and then we use this large M6 washer here, so that holds it in place like that. And then on with the lock washer, and then with the M6 nut. That should go down. Same thing for the last fastening point here. Large washer, lock washer, nut. And then I'm going to tighten all those up. And the last fastenings in the kit that are left over are for mounting the regulator rectifier, which is sitting down here in the stock position. If you want to relocate that to sit underneath the seat here, these slots here are for that, and the fastenings as well. But I want to install the Jadus Performance kit on this bike at some point, and the special harmonic intake interferes with that if I move it, so I'm going to leave it in the stock position in this case. So now we've got the electrics tray in place, we're going to do the last part, which is to attach our extension cable harness that we created. So now I've connected this extension cable that we made down here underneath the swing arm. I won't show you how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward and easy. And then depending on how you wish to route this, you can attach it with to the frame with cable ties, and you can probably run it up this side here, and then up through the front. If I can pull that through, you get the idea. Up through into the electrics tray, and then connect everything here. I'm going to do that and then show you what mine looks like. Yours may look different, and depending on how you wish to route that cable, like I said, is entirely up to you, whether you tape it or use cable ties or whatever. I'll just show you what I've chosen to do. So here's what I've done with my setup, and it's not the most tidy, but I think it's tidy enough. And the seat's going to sit on top of here anyway and cover that up. If you did want to, you could cable tie some of these wires down to the tray. There's plenty of slots in it for that purpose, but the important thing is how it looks on the underside, in which you can see it is completely flush, streamlined, clear as a whistle. So the majority of our installation is done. I'm just going to put the seat back on and Bob's your uncle. Well, that completes another successful Jadus install. I hope you like the look that we've achieved with the triangle tidy kit. I think the results are pretty drastic, and now we've got a pretty lean and tidy looking custom. A couple of very obvious things that I didn't mention throughout the video and that are not included in the kit. That is an air filter on the carburettor, which you'll need to have when you remove the airbox, and a crankcase ventilation filter. You can see here I've got a cheapo one on, and for the air filter I've actually got the Jadus harmonic intake installed, which is not for sale yet. We're still doing some final testing, but until we offer that kit or an air filter, I'll leave that decision up to you to decide what you want to use. I can recommend K&N filters. I can list some that fit, and also Ram air filters in the UK. So I'll leave that decision up to you. But thanks for watching, and I hope you liked the results. Happy reaching and happy riding. Cheers.